You, Mr. Robertson.
You need his number?
I've got his number.
And for the record, it's 3315. And I'm not on this side of things.
Yeah, I bet you repeat that in your sleep, waiting for me to ask you. And we are watching the clock, so go ahead.
Well, I'll introduce the ordinance first, Mr. Chairman, and then we have a short presentation, and then we're happy to take any questions. Both of the short titles of these ordinances will test our Roman numerals. So the first is Ordinance number 2402, which is an ordinance to amend the Code of Sussex County, Chapter 110, Article 3, Sections 110-9, and Chapter 115, Articles 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 26, and Sections 115-4, 115-20, 115-23, 115-29, 115-32, 115-40, 115-48, 115-53, 56, 64, and 115-210 regarding accessory dwelling units. And submitted into the record for this ordinance, Mr. Chairman, we have one copy of the ordinance as it was introduced to County Council, and we have received one letter of support. And with that being said, we have a short presentation and just a few slides. And just to provide a summary, this is the same, more or less the same presentation that Mr. Robertson and I gave to County Council back in January of this year. And we wanted to start by just summarising the accessory dwelling units, and there's a variety of types of accessory dwelling units. And the image on the right is actually a very good indication and illustration of the different types. So they can be detached, and that's the most common type that we see here in Sussex County, but they can also be attached. They can be attached above a garage, for example, or they can be attached an interior within a basement, or they could be in an attic. So ADUs encompasses a variety of types of dwelling units, and they're not necessarily detached. And when we summarise this to County Council, we explained that we already have accessory dwelling units in the code at the moment, and they've been in code since 1998. But they're referred to as garage studio apartments. And there are certain limitations and rules that led to the creation of this ordinance. For example, at the moment, they have to be detached. They have to be an accessory to a dwelling. They must be 800 square feet in area, which is quite limiting and has led to some variance requests on some applications. They have to have at least one parking space, and they don't necessarily have to be a garage or a studio. They just have to be detached. And then in 2019, Council created a notification process that allowed applicants to apply to the county for a garage studio apartment, and for staff to review them and to notify neighbours. And if an objection is received, they proceed to the Board of Adjustment as a special use exception. But in cases where there's no objection and we don't receive anything back within 10 days or we receive letters of support, applicants just pay a $50 fee, and then staff are capable of approving them administratively, and it avoids the need to go to a public hearing before the Board of Adjustment. We gave some numbers to Council about how many of these we've seen since 2019. So we see a few of them every single year. And you can see there's over 70 that have been received since 2019. We don't currently have the 2024 numbers, but most of these are approved. Over 85% are approved without a hearing, and the fee is just $50 to process. So we see some of them across the county every single year. We want to talk about what Kent County have done, and they adopted an ordinance in September of last year. And what that Kent County did was that they had a very good definition of what an ADU is. And I'll read it just for the record. That it's a self-contained dwelling unit that is secondary to the principal dwelling unit on the property and includes independent living facilities such as a separate entrance, bathroom and kitchen. The dwelling unit may be attached to the principal dwelling, which is accessory apartment, or detached on the same lot. And they have a set of rules about how many you can have on a parcel. For example, they say that only one is permitted per property, and it may be attached to the dwelling, that manufactured homes are not permitted as ADUs, that they have to be, in terms of their size, they have to be a maximum of 50% of the floor area of the principal dwelling, they have to be constructed on a slab or a crawl space, and Kent County has a total lot coverage maximum requirement of 50%, so that's 50% of the lot. And they also have to comply with all applicable codes and regulations, such as building code. And so that's adopted, and that's in effect in Kent County. And that led us to think about, in our presentation to County Council, and in terms of how this ordinance has been drafted, we've adopted a similar style. So what the ordinance before you in your paper packet does, it changes the references from garage studio apartments in code to refer to accessory dwelling units. And the purpose of that is to promote consistency with statewide and national practice, We also increases. So right now we have an 800 square foot floor area limitation. We're proposing that that be increased to 1,000 square feet. And similar to Kent County, we're proposing that ADUs be no larger than 50% of the floor area of the single-family dwelling on the lot, and that they shall be no more than 50% of the lot coverage. We're going to require that the ADU has at least one parking space. So that's in addition to any parking spaces that may also exist on the lot. And what is new as part of this ordinance is that we're proposing an administrative approval process that essentially means that you can apply for these, you pay the fee, and they're reviewed administratively by staff for checking things like setbacks and to make sure that heights and parking spaces are provided, but not to take those through the Board of Adjustment as special use exceptions. And then what this also does as well is that we're removing the detached requirement to allow basement ADUs, attached ADUs. That's something a lot of folks have come to us, is that they want ADUs, they don't necessarily want them to be detached.
So just to add to that, there was a county council initiative, came out of, like you said, Kent County, but also the larger conversation about, different types of housing and affordable housing, because this is certainly another type of affordable housing that's available. At the same time, recognized what would be appropriate sort of guardrails to include. And one of the things was the floor area size and the lot coverage size. That was so that we didn't effectively get duplexes. We wanted to make sure this remained accessory to the primary dwelling. That's the intention of it. The other thing that we wanted to include was one parking space. We felt that was important, particularly in some of our developments, off-street parking's at a premium. We wanted to make sure that there was parking on-site available for this. And we also had a minimum lot size, recognizing that, in smaller lot subdivision, like a cluster subdivision where there's 7,500 square foot lots, for example, the building footprint is not really that big to put on another ADU or to add an ADU into a basement of an existing house with, additional traffic and things like that. So that's why there's that minimum lot size. The other thing that I do want to point out is that this is within Sussex County zoning code. This doesn't have any bearing on a homeowners association's decision through their restrictive covenants to regulate how they want homes to be located or whether they want ADUs within their development. This just sets up the pathway for Sussex County to approve those. There would still be that private sort of contractual oversight over it. Timing-wise, too, I know there's a bill floating around the General Assembly on this that you may have heard about. I'm not sure where exactly it stands in terms of, really getting any traction or not. Ours was we had talked with council about ours and began drafting it prior to that. That one's a little, it's different in that it doesn't have any parking requirements. Basically, there's just not any oversight at all, and it also says that you can't prohibit them, and you can't prohibit them through restrictive covenants. So I just sort of point that out. Ours is different from theirs, but we hope that it will, significantly increase the housing stock through ADUs in Sussex County. So.
Okay,
I think that covers it.
all right.
Question?
Any questions?
Yeah.
I do.
The 50% lot coverage, does that apply just to the ADU, or is that the ADU and the residents combined?
The dwelling presumably would go first, and then the 50% would be 50% of the dwelling, but in all cases it's 50% of the total area of the lot. So that's a good question. So if the dwelling occupies some of that, does it then have a net reduction? I would say no. It's easy to calculate based on the total area of the lot. So.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. I think it's a great idea because we clearly need it. But so the maximum on the Newcastle County was 50%. Is there a minimum for the size of the building, the accessory building could be?
So there would be in building code. So you still have to meet building code, which includes the minimum size of the unit.
So it would follow that.
So it depends on how many rooms and how many bedrooms, for example. So theoretically there is a minimum, but because building code can change over time, this ordinance doesn't specify a minimum. But there is the lot area requirements. So effectively, you'd have to design them to be a certain
within. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And the other question I had was regarding the manufactured. So we see the tiny homes, which I think is a great application for people to try to have a place to rent. That would be considered a manufactured home, though. Is that correct?
So we have other provisions in code today for manufactured homes for an emergency hardship purpose and to site a manufactured home on a parcel. So it was envisaged that this would primarily be for stick-built custom designs. Now, if it's an internal ADU, it's not going to be a manufactured home. So you're thinking about detached. I don't think there's language in the ordinance that specifically prevents that, but this was designed for stick-built custom.
I'd really like to be able to see that as an option for people to be able to put like the tiny home as a detached dwelling.
But to respond to that, there is provision today for say, if someone has a medical hardship or an emergency situation and needs to put a manufactured home in their backyard.
But even having to go through that, like if,
Yeah, we looked at that because that was one of the things we wanted to make sure that the tiny homes were covered by that 1,000-foot max, that we didn't have a number that
wasn't accommodating.
Yeah, it wasn't accommodating for that. I think the issue is really, this isn't designed for RVs to become accessory dwellings on the one hand, but there's no reason why a tiny home couldn't be modified to become, I don't think, to be. And
Yeah,
we'll
I wasn't meaning anything with wheels on it.
Yeah, right.
I
right.
mean, just like the smaller units that I've
would be
seen.
covered by this.
Okay,
You'd be
okay.
into that, yeah.
I think that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
I have a question. Go ahead, Scott, sorry.
Yes, so those would typically show up with wheels attached, and then they would be removed when it would be installed.
Right, all through building code. We didn't want to try to get
Yeah,
into
okay.
building code issues in the zoning
Yeah.
code. so,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But that's a fair question, and it was something that we took into account.
So my question would be for line 29, section A, which talks about sewer requirements. So if I'm understanding this correctly, older sewers would not qualify for this.
Yeah, so we included that part about section 110-9 just to make sure that ADUs were included potentially in the EDUs for the lot. But you're right, they're still going to have to either comply with county engineering because they're going to need a permit from them or DENREC on the septic, so, yeah.
What I'm saying is, so I run across some sewers that are over-designed. Somebody was going to build a 5,000 square foot, 5-bedroom house, and building a 2,000 square foot house with 2 bedrooms. If they can bring documentation saying that this sewer is designed for this amount of rooms, would they be able to use that?
Yeah.
So-
Go ahead. Yeah.
Correct. So as part of our review process, whether it's at the time of applying for your ADU or applying for a building permit, that's all going to be checked. So
Okay.
we're not going to allow a building permit if there's no provision for sewer or there's no provision for septic.
So they can bring that documentation
That-
to you?
that-
Yep,
Okay,
absolutely.
thank you.
Yep.
That's my question. That was it.
Anything else? All right, gentlemen, if you'll take a seat nearby, we'll see if there's anyone here. Okay, is anyone who would like to speak in regard to ordinance 24-02, accessory dwelling units? Anyone? I think Mr. Hutt might have a few well-chosen words to share with us. Come on up.
There's no street name involved. How can he?
I know.
I
Well,
was
no,
going to say that I don't have any good history here. I don't have any good street names. It's going to be rather dull, unfortunately. And if I may, I'm going to hand White House, Mr. Robinson. For the record, David Hutt with the law firm of Morris James here in Georgetown. What is being handed down to you are 3 comments on the draft ordinance. And I want to start by saying that I'll echo the comments that have been made by the commission members, that I think that the ordinance is certainly something that's needed and something that will be very helpful. And my comments are certainly directed to try to help make that as helpful and as useful as possible for everyone involved. I did not mimic the exact style of changes, because in the draft ordinance there's all sorts of italicized things and underlined things. I took all of that, and if I changed something, there's a strike through or a double underline if it's being added. The first item that you can see there is lines 105 to 106, and it goes to Mr. Mears' exact question that he asked. And you'll see that I propose that lines 105 and 106 be deleted. With the information I just heard from Mr. Whitehouse and Mr. Robertson, I would change that to say so that it would not be deleted. The first 3 words would be deleted, And in that last sentence would read, "A lot with an accessory dwelling unit shall not have a lot coverage that is greater than 50%. As it's presently written, I think it says that the accessory dwelling unit cannot have a lot coverage that is greater than 50%. And I don't think that's what was intentioned. It can only be half as big as the floor area of the main dwelling. And again, I was sort of on the same page, I believe, as Commissioner Mears was with respect to that question or concern. So again, what I've written here is not correct, but what I just said, I think would help clarify that in the future code provision if it's adopted by council. The next section is sections 116, or I'm sorry, rather lines 116 through 119. And I will tell you that I read that provision forwards and backwards and sideways and struggled to understand it. And so I took a stab at trying to make it more understandable, at least my understanding of what was intended there. And the struggle that I had in trying to decipher what it meant was I understood the purpose of it. I think the purpose of it is so that if you have a detached accessory dwelling unit, it has to be behind the main dwelling, and it was trying to impact the setbacks to say that you can't have it essentially, significantly outside the setbacks of the main dwelling. It sort of needs to stay in, visually needs to stay in line with the main dwelling. I don't think that's necessarily what it said as it was written, and that may be Kent County's fault. I won't blame Mr. Robertson or Mr. Whitehouse. But what I did, as you can see, based on the double underlining and the strike-it-throughs that are there, I separated into two concepts. One is the attached, because obviously the attached is going to be part of the single-family dwelling, and it just has to comply with the setback requirements in the zoning code. And then identified separately that a detached accessory dwelling unit has to be behind the primary single-family dwelling, and its setbacks have to be the largest setback achievable between the minimum setback required in the zoning code for the primary single-family dwelling and then 1/2 of the single-family dwelling's actual side and rear setbacks. And that may, in fact, be no clearer than it was before, but it was my attempt to clarify that provision. So
I can explain it too. At least the intent of it is if you have a lot with a side boundary and there's a 10-foot setback established by code, and your house, say, is 20 feet actually built off the property line, so that the house is set back 20 feet, even though it's a 10-foot setback. The idea would be that you could build the accessory structure to 15 feet. So that it's not sticking out completely behind the house. And I don't know if that even matters. I mean, I don't know if we even care, but that came from Kent County, so that, visually, if you're looking at the front of the house, the bulk of what you're looking at is the house in front and not, So the flip side of it is I don't know how well that works on a really large, if you had like a 5-acre parcel, That might make for some odd math as I'm sitting here thinking about it as well. We were thinking, when we were drafting, I think we were considering more subdivision lots than, larger tracts. So it may be something to consider removing if appropriate altogether.
I would have no objection to its removal. I was simply trying to clarify the language that was there. But Mr. Robertson, having pointed out the large-scale lot, and I'm trying to visualize that now, and if you had to be a minimum of 1/2 of that setback, that could be awkward. Or look awkward.
That's an easy fix if you decide to do it either way. So
yeah. So those first two items that you see on the printouts that I gave you are text changes, and certainly the last one that I'm going to talk about here is a text change as well. But I will tell you that in addition to being a text change, what I'm going to be saying is a lot of policy involved as well. What I've proposed is the deletion of the minimum lot size of 1/2 acre in size from the requirements that are found in this proposed ordinance. And the reason for that is set forth, in my mind, in the very purpose of the ordinance as it's in the recitals. It talks about the need for affordable housing options in Sussex County and a diversification of housing options being available. And the number of lots that exist, particularly in eastern Sussex County, that are going to be 1/2 acre in size or greater is very few. In the past 10 years, I believe I've presented one standard subdivision to this county, which is the size subdivision you would need in order for this ordinance to have an impact and take effect. And what concerns me, and again, I want to start by saying this ordinance is very well intentioned, and I think it's headed in the right direction. What concerns me is these are the eastern side of Sussex County is where affordable housing is probably most desperately needed by individuals. And a huge section of that this will never apply to. And in my mind, the protection for these cluster subdivisions is the restrictive covenants that Mr. Robertson mentioned when he gave his introductory comments to this. The counties, every person who lives in a subdivision or community that has restrictive covenants is subject to Sussex County zoning code, and of course the private contractual requirements that are within whatever restrictive covenants exist for that. And sometimes the two agree, but it's always the most restrictive of the two that applies. So if you live in community X and community X does not allow for an accessory dwelling unit or something like that, then you couldn't do it irrespective of whether you had a half acre, a 3/4 acre, a full acre, or a 7,500 square foot lot. And so my concern is that presently, if you lived in one of those communities, you could file for that. You could file a special use exception request with Mr. Whitehouse's office, and you could go through the process, whether it's the administrative process or the public hearing process, and you could actually achieve that. And again, you still having to comply with restrictive covenants. With this ordinance, that's not even an option. There are no special use exceptions available. It's simply a permitted use. And again, it's sort of the inverse. The goal of this was so that a person wouldn't have to do either the administrative process or the public hearing process. And I think it may have an inverse effect of eliminating a large portion of the county from this being able to be applied or used. And again, as I stated, that's very much a policy argument, but it's something that when I looked at this, it concerned me that this will not be as helpful as it's intended to be to the greatest number of people that are out there. And again, that's why I considered striking it. I would note that even 1/2 acre, I'm not sure that number makes sense. Within the AR section, which is the section where these requirements are, if you have a septic system, the lots are 20,000 square feet, which is, you could have a standard subdivision of 20,000 square foot lots. The county doesn't see them often. But
that occurred to me as well, Mr. Hutt, that the half acre, you might want to say 20,000 instead of, because technically 20,000 is less than half an acre. You at least want to say 20,000, maybe you'd even want to say 10. On a practical matter, on a 7,500 square foot lot, I'm not sure how you'd ever get it done.
I think in an attached structure is how you would get that done.
You're just going to take the garage and use it as an accessory dwelling unit. That would probably be your only option on a 7,500 square foot. But I hear what you're saying. You would like people to have that option. Okay.
And again, I think the ordinance as it's written eliminates that as an option because there's no more, even if you wanted, and maybe, again, there was a number of things I thought of. Maybe there's still a special use exception request route available. It's a permitted use for certain size lots and a special use exception for smaller lots.
That occurred to me as well. Yeah. To let anything smaller than 20,000 has to go through a process.
Now that I've said that and you've agreed with me,
It's time for you to say them.
I was going to point. I was going to. No, I should. I was going to point out that this is also available in MR and GR, and the minimum size lot there is 10,000 square feet. And so that's where, again, that's why I'm not saying I have the answer. It's just a concern because I think this is needed, and I feel like there's a whole slice of Sussex County that gets really bypassed, overlooked, whatever you want to say with this ordinance.
Yeah. So. You're right.
I have observed in looking at real estate when I bought my house, there's lots of 0.49 acre lots out there for sale that are not in communities that this would, exclude them from being able to do this. So, thank you.
All right, sir.
Those are all my comments.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak in this particular ordinance? All right. Okay, come on up. Tell us who you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Matt Lloyd. I live at 32228 Old Hickory Road in Laurel. First, I just want to thank you for your service and dedication to Sussex County. I recognize it's often a thankless job, but also a very necessary job for the betterment of the county. I also want to say I'm happy to see the ADU ordinance has been introduced. Big thanks to County Council for putting this forward. I believe this has been a long time coming, and I think these ADUs will go a long way in helping solve the affordable housing crisis that exists here in Sussex County. I plan to be brief, under 5 minutes. In 2019, an independent council study determined we were 10,000 households short, and now 5 years later, we can imagine it is likely doubled, if not tripled in size of the supply-demand problem. These ADUs are a great way to increase the housing supply while minimizing consumption of natural resources, as well as expanding the rights of the citizens who live here by allowing homeowners to occupy this additional unit, be it for family members, caretakers, or to increase their household income by renting it out. All this can be done at a fraction of the cost of what it would be to build onto a new property. Earlier this year, I came out on the radio and newspaper championing the need for these things. I have personal experience building these and using them at properties that I own out of state. They work, they're great options for affordable housing, and they can tap into existing infrastructure on the property, making them ideal, cost-effective housing options. Reading through the first rendition of the ordinance change, I noticed a couple items for your consideration. I've taken the time to change the verbiage using the great work that's already been done by the Commission staff. I will work quickly through those, explaining the reasoning behind some of these changes, and then provide each of you with a copy of my proposed verbiage. First, and I know this has been touched on, regarding the separate septic requirement, lines 29 through 33 stipulate that an independent sewer is required for newly constructed dwellings. However, in accordance with DENREC, because septic capacity is determined by bedroom count, if the proposed ADU, along with a primary dwelling bedroom count, does not exceed the current septic capacity, then the owner should automatically have the right to utilize the existing septic system, provided that it's able to be proved the size of the septic and up to snuff with DENREC. But if the overall bedrooms exceed the current capacity, it should say that a new system may be required, or the homeowner has the option to upgrade the existing septic. This is critical because of limited parcel size, soil suitability, as well as cost of installing a separate system. These options should be the right of the homeowner based on their existing septic capacity, not necessarily determined by the county engineer. It's a slight change, but I believe it's necessary to be specific in the language. You should note, when I wrote my recommendations, I kept them as simple and as close to the original verbiage as I could. Secondly, regarding the type of ADUs, lines 66 through 71, point out that the ADUs may be attached or detached from the primary dwelling. Again, I know it's been touched on, but across the country, there's a third type recognized, referred to as an interior ADUs. These would be finished basements with separate entrances and egress considerations in conformity with International Building Code. It could be interpreted that attached ADUs may include finished basements, but as a matter of being consistent with standard practices and verbiage, I think it's necessary to include attached, detached, and interior types to avoid confusion or misinterpretation of the ordinance. Third, lines 89 through 92 discuss the fee. And let me just say, as a conservative Republican who owns his property and pays his taxes, I don't think there should be a cost for doing what I interpret as my right anyway. But for the sake of standard practices and paying for the county services, I'd request we change the fee to not exceed $50. This is to provide consistency and a fixed cost figure for homeowners to count on for years to come. Fourth, lines 94 through 97 require a signed sealed survey by a licensed surveyor. However, in the case of an existing dwelling, a survey would already be on file. We know where the existing structure is, and so for simplicity and cost sake, I think we should eliminate this requirement and simply ask for an accurate drawing depicted on paper such as graph paper with scale and dimensions showing the location and footprint of the dwellings. I'd like to remind you that the whole purpose of this ADU ordinance is to encourage the building of housing and the supply thereof. But each requirement that we place that adds to the cost of the project just increases the barrier of entry and limits people from starting on a project like this anyway. Fifth, lines 103 through 106 discuss the maximum footprint. I think it's worth noting that a significant portion of ADUs will be converted from existing structures such as garages and pole barns. In these cases, to limit the size of the conversion will unnecessarily restrict what would otherwise be already a 50% solution and would eliminate a significant number of ADUs from becoming available. by owners who've already invested a handsome sum into their secondary dwelling. In these cases, I believe it's appropriate to consider foregoing the size limit. Lastly, lines 116 through 119 stipulate that an ADU be placed behind the primary dwelling.